To give you an idea of last night, this guy, when positioned to be guillotined, he turned his head around to watch the blade fall on him. That's the kind of guy who inspired Raskolnikov. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Real quick, if you would like to see a certain book reviewed, you can get in touch and I'll do it for a fee and move it up in the pipeline, so to speak. But not your own book. This is not an opportunity for you to rent my mouth to shill yourself. By that, I mean the book should be something that makes sense for the show, please. Thank you. Okay, part two. So I finished Crime and Punishment on Christmas Day, 2022, on what was one of the coldest days in 30 years in Florida. Appropriate, no doubt. I've been reading this thing since summer. I've been listening to this audiobook, The Sinner and the Saint by Kevin Birmingham, since I finished the book to get some context on its construction or Dostoevsky's influences when writing it. I put the link below, check it out. I have no issue with audiobooks if it's, like nonfiction or supplementary material. It's a fascinating listen and it's one of my main sources for the material for this review. Okay, so where we left off in Crime and Punishment. We left off right when Svidrigailov came in and introduced himself to Raskolnikov in his bedroom, apartment, attic thing, which is where many people just seem to appear in Raskolnikov's life. So Raskolnikov does his crime, he's done his crime, and frenetically debates turning himself in or not. He's ruining his relationship with his friends and family. He befriends Sonia, this saintly prostitute, who nearly described her as holy, but thought better of it, whom he confesses to eventually, and whom he also falls in love with. Svidrigailov, the murdering, raping antagonist of the novel, is after Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister, who previously worked for him but then kind of ran away because he was trying to get her. And as the translator Richard Pevere in the foreword alludes to, or the introduction, Radia Raskolnikov is essentially placed between these two paths to follow, right? On the left hand, that of the satanic Svidrigailov. On the right hand, that of the saintly Sonia. When Svidrigailov realizes he can't have Radia's sister, Dunya, he decides to go to America and puts a gun in his mouth and kills himself. I liked that phrasing, going to America. That's what he says to the soldier he commits suicide in front of on the street. He says, I'm going to America. So then Raskolnikov confesses and is sent to a work camp in Siberia, like Dostoevsky himself had been previously. Raskolnikov is hated by his fellow prisoners there because they think he's an atheist, I believe, is why. They love the pious Sonia, though, who has followed Raskolnikov and lives nearby. And in the end, Raskolnikov has this sudden moment of grace after having a dream, like a moment of divine revelation, and cries at Sonia's feet, reborn like Lazarus. And that's that. 2 pages of crime and 578 of punishment, as it were. Okay, so what did I enjoy about it? Well, I mean, the psychological depiction of a man at war with himself, inside himself, between cold, calculating reason and his inherent compassionate humanism, is a great setup. And there are some very compelling moments worthy of your attention. And if you're beginning to feel like you're having a war with yourself inside your own mind, might I suggest you check out today's sponsor, BetterHelp. Self-care is critical in times like these. There's absolutely no shame in prioritizing your mental health. BetterHelp, that is, Better Help with a P, can help you with that. Many people out there are experiencing loneliness, depression, and struggles of all kinds, whether it's financial, mental, or social. It's not an easy time out there. It really isn't. Whether it's current events or bad relationships, or confusion about the direction your life is taking, whatever. I think it's easy to feel lost or unfocused, unmoored. Exercise can help, eating right can help, therapy can help. So I'd like to tell you about BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you on a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can change your therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality that you'd expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/BTF, and I've also linked them below in the description. Check it out. Thanks a bunch. The influences that inspired the creation of Raskolnikov and Crime and Punishment are more interesting to me than the novel itself. The strange, solipsistic philosophy egoism by Max Stirner, Dostoevsky's imprisonment and forced labor experience in Siberia, where he was actually spending time with and speaking frequently to real murderers, Christianity, of course. Dostoevsky had like one book out there, I think, which was the Bible. And the actions of the gay murderer slash poet who rocked Paris back in the day and influenced a ton of authors, from Stendhal to Balzac to Flaubert, Pierre Lacenaire. To give you an idea of Lacenaire, this guy, when positioned to be guillotined, he turned his head around to watch the blade fall on him. That's the kind of guy who inspired Raskolnikov. And Raskolnikov is a play on Raskolnik, which is like a deviation. It's like a schism in the religion, I think, of Russian Greek Orthodox, where, you know, they have all these various branches of these sects, these break-offs, essentially, that range from those who thought that the Tsar was the devil to those like the Skopsi, I think, who basically are, I mean, I won't give you many trigger warnings. If you look this one up, I'm definitely giving you one though, because the Wikipedia page is bad enough. Skopsi, that sect, that break-off, that schism was, they wanted to be as close to angels as possible, so they cut off their genitals and their breasts, or burned them. So they wanted to get rid of anything that was pleasurable on their bodies or something, to be as close to angels as possible, to be completely pure. And the result is obviously horrific. And there are photos. Anyways, some of the kinds of folks that Dostoevsky was hanging out with. I thought Raskolnikov's failure to embody the kind of exceptional man that transcends common universal morality was compelling. That was curious. I thought that was pretty smart. I thought his psychological war with the police and trying to remain one step ahead, though he was facing quite a formidable detective who was just relentless, was vaguely interesting, especially if you like crime dramas or detective novels, mysteries, that kind of thing. Things get so nuanced and his thoughts get so in the reeds that the reader is turned upside down, wondering what's what. It's difficult to stick with sometimes, to follow the ball, so to speak, in an enjoyably challenging way that's kind of humorous in its exaggerated paranoia. I thought the dark, eerie, cold and grim St. Petersburg atmosphere was pretty good, rendered pretty convincingly. I think the novel in and of itself, on the whole, is philosophically sophisticated and worth reading once for that alone. I wanted to like it. But ultimately, I'm forced to admit, this book is a mess. It was one of the most tedious things I have ever read in my entire life. I'm telling you. Sorry, Jeff. Thank you very much for the book, though. There's an onslaught of intentionally unnecessary details meant to represent the thought patterns of the characters. Okay, human consciousness, right? And while I'll grant you that it did indeed paint them in full form, like ad nauseum, they weren't interesting to me at all. They don't change. I've seen the term caricature thrown around in reviews, and that is what all of them ultimately felt like. Cardboard cutouts meant to represent people in service of a morality tale. Even Dostoevsky making the bad characters do good things. Raskolnikov gives Marmeladov's family money. Svidrigailov pays for the care of the orphans, etc. Coincidences, deus ex machina, dream sequences. The whole thing with the overly affected detective Porfiry bustling about his office and addressing Raskolnikov as dear, as if he's like performing a drag show or something, and then volunteering information about his hemorrhoids. I'm just like, what am I reading? This is a mess. This is a mess. Okay, it's a mess. And I just accepted it at some point. I was just like, well, oh well. And there's this whole unconvincing moralistic flavor to the book that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Even if I basically agree with his moral ideas and I find the philosophical questions compelling in the book, it was a chore to entertain. There are parts that are so overly sentimental or melodramatic. I mean, Ivanovna beating her children and making them dance in the street on the day of their father's memorial banquet, hacking up blood from consumption. I mean, we're drifting into the realm of dark comedy here, you know what I mean? I mean, it was just so absurdly morose and intentionally feel-bad, manipulative at the very least. The whole thing just felt so desperate, right? There was just this overwhelming need to pluck at your heartstrings and force an emotional response, like a Disney film. It's just like this is cruel, tragic misery piled up to the point of absurdity. It just makes me squint and go like, what's your angle here, pal? It's the same thing I had with Lars von Trier films. Von Trier is trying to convince us of the world's evil. I guess Dostoevsky is trying to convince us in certain parts, not all of it perhaps, but in many parts of I think what Nabokov referred to as the ethical supremacy of suffering, right? The nobility of suffering. Not convinced. I won't argue that suffering makes you stronger. It allows you to endure more suffering, but if you're telling me that that's what people should be prioritizing, or that's better in some capacity than not suffering, then I disagree. Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment after he lost everything on the roulette table in Wiesbaden, Germany. He was living in a hotel that he was about to get kicked out of, and his life was in total shambles from the sounds of it. So he wrote this book to get out of debt, and it was serialized in a paper. While a big fan of Tolstoy, Vladimir Nabokov, author of Lolita, Russian himself, of course, Russian and American, I consider him kind of an American author though, said that Dostoevsky had flashes of excellent humor, but alas, with wastelands of literary platitudes in between. Okay, now the obvious jab you could take at Nabokov would be that the closest character to Humbert in Crime and Punishment, the nihilistic Svidrigailov, commits suicide and is ultimately shown to be kind of a phony, so of course Nabokov would hate it. I get it. Thanks for pointing that out, Tristan from Goodreads. I suspect you're a viewer of the show, actually. I think I've seen you in the comments. That said, Nabokov, to the best of my knowledge, isn't Humbert any more than Dostoevsky is Raskolnikov. And Nabokov is definitely the better writer, but probably not the better philosopher. Dostoevsky is a genius, a great mind. But it's a mess. It truly is. I've linked to the article by Nabokov below. As it so happens, when Dostoevsky was interrogated in a fortress after being arrested in that political circle he was in, the head of the interrogation commission and the officer in charge of the fortress was none other than Nabokov's great-great-uncle, so there you go. Apparently he wasn't mean to the prisoners though, so there's that. If you read Lolita and then Crime and Punishment, you'll see what I mean. Both are landmarks of literary history. One is stunningly written, the other is not. Both are enormous in their profundity. Both make you empathize with characters previously thought impossible to be empathetic towards, thus broadening the scope of our empathy as humans, so to speak. And in that matter and many others, both are works of indisputable genius. And actually, the relationship between Raskolnikov and Svidrigailov was actually strikingly similar to that between Humbert and Quilty in Lolita. Quilty being the truly soulless monster and the pair of damned individuals. By comparison, an actually evil human. It's the same relationship in Crime and Punishment. But at the end, changes that anyways. But Dostoevsky actually studied murderers in Siberia, right? And studying all these prisoners out there was how he came to the conclusion that suffering was noble. Personally, from what I've seen, living 33 years of my life here, you're gonna suffer regardless. You can try and make yourself strong to endure more of it, or not. You're going to end up dying, dead, and forgotten all the same. If you want more suffering, there's plenty of it to be had. Then you'll find out what it allows you to do. Endure more suffering. And then there's plenty more to be had. And on and on and on we go. Whether you've got too much suffering or not enough of it, you're going to be circling around dissatisfied for your entire life. The Buddhists refer to that as samsara. Anyways, make up your own mind. I do disagree with Nabokov in his suggestion that it's not artistically valuable to inhabit the mind of an insane criminal of the Dostoevskian variety, right? With that level of crime scene violence. Because the crime that takes place is actually very graphic in the book. It's quite chilling in its description, and effective for that reason. It holds up today, for sure. The first 100 pages, up until immediately after the crime are quite good. I think the book is a magnificent achievement in that respect. So you inhabit the mind of Raskolnikov after he's murdered these women, and you see exactly what happens, and you can read exactly what's going through his head. Because where else can you so convincingly read the thoughts of someone who has committed so horrific an act? People who actually do that kind of thing probably wouldn't be able to express that to you in writing like Dostoevsky's. So, to really get in there into the minutia of paranoia and anxiety and guilt and all these things is very impressive. I totally disagree with that. Dostoevsky was a neurotic hypochondriac, or so it seems to me. And all of this seemed to allow him to paint a vividly convincing portrait of a man internally truly descending into hell. That part is riveting. Hats off. Though what is strange to me, and maybe you'll agree, is that even when he repents, in the end, not once do we really get a sense of a man who is sorry for what he's done. Not me, at least. He's just super disappointed that he's not the Ubermensch that he theorized about. Dostoevsky writes mystery novels, as Nabokov puts it, and treats his characters like pawns in a chess game, right? They don't change inside. The plot changes around them. They're treated like chessmen in a complicated chess problem. But, to push against Nabokov again, Crime and Punishment is compelling because it's a murder mystery. But the mystery is not who committed the murder. As this book I'm listening to says, the mystery is why. And not even he knows, Nobody knows. Nobody really knows by the end of the book. He has his theories, but they just don't hold up. Also, the whole character of Lucian and that whole subplot seemed totally inconsequential. It just plain stopped. It's speculated that it was because of Dostoevsky's deadline. I'm inclined to agree. His entire existence really only seemed to reinforce this image of Sonia as the, suffering martyr. And let's talk about that. It's my opinion that the whole book falls apart in the character of Sonia. After we see how Dostoevsky has constructed her, it's so far-fetched it annihilates believability, even forgiving the theatricality and her overreactions. She reminds me of the woman in The Simpsons who's going like, oh, will somebody please think of the children? She's not a person, and she's definitely not a Russian prostitute. Sonia the saintly prostitute's whole martyristic, timid, hand-wringing, obsessively pious exaltation of suffering as something noble seemed to me, frankly, to kind of lean into the realm of the mentally ill. Dostoevsky also visited prostitutes. So I suppose it's possible that he found someone to base her on through real experience. It's just, that whole whore with a heart of gold cliche thing. And the way he made her so weak. Just incapable of helping herself or those around her, aside from being a fanatical Christian, was kind of just insulting to prostitutes, I felt. You know what I mean? She seemed too weak in her constitution to be a prostitute. This gal would basically fall apart on the first day. You know what I mean? I can't blame her, of course, but you know what I mean? That's a hard life, man. Those gals are way tougher than me. I'd like to read Sonia's story rewritten by an actual prostitute. Because I believed the murderer, right? I believed Raskolnikov. I didn't believe Sonia for a second. Too thin. Just a caricature. We never see Sonia's life as a prostitute. He never goes into that. Even though he goes into Raskolnikov and the murder very graphically. It's quite explicit, so to speak. If you're going to write about suffering, the suffering should probably be included, you know what I mean? And I don't mean it in a prurient or exploitative way. In fact, I think it's more insulting to prostitutes and people who are going through that whole ordeal if you don't confront it like you would the violence in the murder. He may have been trying to do it out of respect, I imagine, but I don't think it's respectful at all. I think it just kind of shies away from what somebody in that position is facing, which makes her seem, again, not real. Right? So, if you're going to confront the base reality of murder, why not confront the base reality of prostitution? Why are we seeing all this graphic violence in great detail, but we're not seeing anything of her life as a prostitute, when she's such a major component of the story? It's just odd. Crime and Punishment, in my opinion, is a series of very interesting philosophical questions placed inside a poorly written, rushed novel. People have said Dostoevsky was a better philosopher than he was a novelist. I have to agree, based on what I've read so far, which was Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment. I prefer Notes from Underground. For all the impressive displays of human consciousness and the ideas it wrestles with, I felt it was a bloated, yet simultaneously in the notorious epilogue at the end, which has divided people, I believe, a rushed mess of a novel, just trying to cram all the stuff in there that couldn't fit, because of a deadline. This is because, as Denis in the comments wrote below, in the review of part 1, back then you got paid by the page. And then in the end, Dostoevsky was late on his deadline. So late, actually, that he had to dictate the last bit to a typist, a woman who would eventually go on to be a kind of collaborator, and his wife, actually. So I thought it was just god-awful to read. Clunky, redundant, and just plain boring. Also, the entire story seems to just happen by happenstance. He gets the idea to murder by happenstance. One fine day, Raskolnikov woke up and decided he was going to axe an old lady, Then the police officer knows exactly what he's up to, and all the other significant events occur simply by happenstance. Raskolnikov wakes up in his attic room and there's somebody standing at the foot of his bed, whether it's Svidrigailov, whether it's his mother and sister, or the police officer. And another thing, Dostoevsky did not contend with the problem of evil, in my opinion. This is a moralistic tale wherein even the bad guy, Svidrigailov, in the end, kills himself because he can't have a pure and beautiful woman, Raskolnikov's sister. This guy who murdered his previous wife and raped a young girl who ended up killing herself, which he shrugged off as what? Again, this seems downright naive. We're giving Dostoevsky too much slack. Are you serious? This is completely out of character. He actually does change, right? There's a moment where somebody does change in the book, but it's completely out of character. It makes zero sense. There's nothing to indicate that Svidrigailov would have done that. You think a guy like that would kill himself for a woman? A guy who is truly evil and is not in conflict with himself? at least according to everything we've known up till that point. I mean, if Dostoevsky is trying to say people who have committed evil acts always have some sort of tumultuous internal moral struggle going on and they're always in conflict with themselves, it just seems that Dostoevsky is trying to say that nobody is truly and ultimately entirely evil. There are people so evil out there in the world that it would just shatter your conception of reality. I mean, you wouldn't believe it. There are people out there who would murder your entire family and get a perfect night's sleep. They go out dancing afterwards. We know they exist. You can open up your local news. I mean, it's like, this is the character that we needed Raskolnikov to face. We needed a real warlord slash Napoleon, not Svidrigailov. You know, this doesn't even make sense, right? What are we doing? Another thing that ruined the whole book, in my opinion, ruined the whole thing for me. I mean, if you're gonna have Raskolnikov wrestle with truly solipsistic evil, then do it, right? Don't have him have like a change of heart at the end that just like, he's like, oh, well, he's not such a bad guy after all, and he's depressed, and now he realizes, you know, the wrongs of his ways or whatever, now he's gonna kill himself. I mean, it's like, what? Because of Raskolnikov's sister? I mean, nah. I live in this world, man. You open up your local news on Google and you see characters 10 times more evil and completely indifferent. That's the horror we all have to contend with. And Dostoevsky, ultimately, in this book, does not. He didn't really make Svidrigailov something to contend with. You need to make him a real result of somebody who has committed horrible deeds and doesn't care, because that's real. There are people like that. There's plenty of them. And if you backtrack and just say, oh, well, this must be where committing evil deeds gets you. Yeah, okay, for some people, sure. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. But that's obvious. That doesn't contend with the problem of evil in itself. That doesn't contend with the people who are actually evil, right? So I thought he was too weak, basically. I thought the character was too weak. I think Raskolnikov should have really had to contend with something that somebody who it was almost attractive, you know, to be, so that it has some quality of trying to seduce him, you know, because why else would he? Because there must have been something in his theory that was attractive, you know, the will to power and being the Napoleon Ultraman and so on and so forth. If you're going to have that character, if you're going to have that path represented, make him look like something that somebody like Raskolnikov could fall for, could want to be, could want to embody, right? Make him really look like that. Because there are people out there who are incredibly powerful and completely evil, who are not going to kill themselves. They're really not. They're going to keep doing exactly what they do, unfortunately. So, obviously you could say that Svidrigailov represents most people who do terrible things. They're totally at conflict with themselves, they're miserable inside. But I was under the impression that Dostoevsky was trying to represent the exception, like the really, you know, because that's kind of what Raskolnikov is. Normal people don't commit murders. So what is the logical conclusion of the one who is able to sleep at night after committing murder, after doing horrible things? What does that look like? So Dostoevsky's point, perhaps, is that there are no exceptions. But that's just not true. It's just not true. That otherwise, I mean, we wouldn't have war on the scale we have today. Which is why, again, I'd be very interested to see what he thought of the bomb, right? You know, because there are exceptions. Clearly, World War II showed us so many demonstrations of exceptions that, you know, by exception, I mean people who are able to do horrible things and not be in conflict with themselves. Yeah, I don't buy it. But maybe I'm wrong. Everybody else, feel free to chime in here. And then finally, the tacked on thing in the epilogue about Raskolnikov having saved 2 kids from a burning building, which just so happens to humanize him a little bit more. I was just like, stop it, dude, stop. Just, you know, Dostoevsky's dancing on stage and you just want to take that hook and just grab him and get off the stage, man, stop. Granted, I thought that Raskolnikov's dream was quite eerie, of course, and I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, there's a very, very interesting dream that Raskolnikov has right before the end of the book, which I'm going to read to you. It's about a page long, so that's kind of perfect. It's a hell of a prophecy. As he began to recover, he remembered his dreams from when he was still lying in feverish delirium. In his illness, he had dreamed that the whole world was doomed to fall victim to some terrible, as yet unknown and unseen pestilence spreading to Europe from the depths of Asia. Everyone was to perish, except for certain, very few chosen ones. Some new trichinae had appeared, microscopic creatures that lodged themselves in men's bodies. But these creatures were spirits, endowed with reason and will. Those who received them into themselves immediately became possessed and mad. But never had people considered themselves so intelligent and unshakable in the truth as did these infected ones. Never had they thought their judgments, their scientific conclusions, their moral convictions and beliefs more unshakable. Entire settlements, entire cities and nations would be infected and go mad. Everyone became anxious and no one understood anyone else. Each thought the truth was contained in himself alone and suffered looking at others, beat his breast, wept, and wrung his hands. They did not know whom or how to judge, could not agree on what to regard as evil, what as good. They did not know whom to accuse, whom to vindicate. People killed each other in some sort of meaningless spite. They gathered into whole armies against each other, but already on the march, the armies would suddenly begin destroying themselves. The ranks would break up, the soldiers would fall upon one another, stabbing and cutting, biting and eating one another. In the cities, the bells rang all day long. Everyone was being summoned, but no one knew who was summoning them or why, and everyone felt anxious. The most ordinary trades ceased, because everyone offered his own ideas, his own corrections, and no one could agree. Agriculture ceased. Here and there people would band together, agree among themselves to do something, swear never to part, but immediately begin something completely different from what they themselves had just suggested, begin accusing one another, fighting, stabbing. Fires broke out, famine broke out. Everyone and everything was perishing. The pestilence grew and spread further and further. Only a few people in the world could be saved. They were pure and chosen, destined to begin a new generation of people and a new life, to renew and purify the earth. But no one had seen these people anywhere. No one had heard their words or voices. That's kind of eerie, no? Disturbingly prophetic. So this, I assume, is to drive home the idea that we all need to adhere to a kind of social, moral, religious code as a foundation for society, as otherwise everything falls out from under us, and we kill each other and ourselves, like Svidrigailov, and everything just goes to shit. Okay, right on. It still doesn't contend with the evil Napoleonic exceptions, so I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with that, but, you know, it seems to me that plenty of evil people out there sleep well, and they don't necessarily feel like killing themselves, so what does that mean? That's where Dostoevsky can't convincingly go, and I don't know if anyone can. So yeah, I didn't detest it, you know, it's not a bad novel, nor is it entirely overrated at all. There's plenty of great stuff about it. Philosophically, as food for thought, the ideas in it are extremely intelligent, but the story didn't feel believable, was clunky, and I just thought, overall, all the ideas could have been expressed much better. I get that it's a conversion story, it's the retelling of Lazarus, I get it, but ultimately I was disappointed. I'm not satisfied, and worse than that, I'm completely indifferent to the plights of these characters. Because his portrayals in the end didn't feel honest. In the end, it seemed to be a moral tale, not a reflection of the world we live in. And great literature, to me, no matter how strange or experimental or kind of outrageous or not or subtle, great literature is somehow, even in a solipsistic way, a reflection of the world we inhabit. Is it better than food? Nah, not for me. I didn't like it. But look at this review. Look at all the ideas generated from this thing. It's great. Look at what went into making it, right? I mean, in and of itself, that kind of culmination, that collection is a triumph. But yeah, I would not read it again unless I was compelled by unforeseen forces. I preferred Notes from Underground. Because it was shorter, yes. But I'll tell you, I really enjoyed thinking about why I disliked it. I like boxing with Dostoevsky, right? Come on, you little son of a bitch. We'll see about the Brothers K and Demons down the road. You know, I'm in no rush. As a psychological profile and philosophical work, it's sometimes incredible. You probably will not find a more nuanced, hyper-specific, amplified map of a criminal's thoughts and feelings in literature. I'm sure this is one of those pivotal moments in the show where I'll lose subscribers, but I don't care. Am I here to tell you what you've already heard? Is that why you're here? For me to validate the opinions of the crowd? Nah. But on the whole, it was a great experience. You know, I enjoyed wrestling with it. So, thank you very much again for the book, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Did not enjoy reading it necessarily. However, really enjoyed kind of struggling with it. Really enjoyed thinking about it. No regrets whatsoever, but once was enough for now. We'll see, but yeah, coffee time. Thank you very much to all the patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Andrew C. Thank you very much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, plus a bag of delicious coffee from Myanmar, and I hope you love it. Thanks a bunch. All right, well, that is all I've got for you today. Please subscribe if you have not already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. And yeah, thank you very much for watching and, you know, supporting the show in whichever way you're able to. It truly means a lot. I'm thrilled to be able to keep doing this into 2023, and I hope you've enjoyed over the last year. And yeah, Happy New Year to all of you, wherever you are. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourself. Have a great night. See you next year. Ciao.